everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Deep Thoughts. And today we are talking about Stars Align Episode 3, and I really would like it if the show could relax. Now, before I get into this week's video, I do, as always, want to give a big thank you to those of you who shared last week's video over on Twitter, namely at AnimeTrashBin, at Unbairu, at FireOtaku845, and at JuniPerDreams. Thank you all so much for sharing last week's video over on Twitter, everybody, and if you too would like to have your name shouted out in next week's Stars Align video, then be sure to share this video around on the internet, and then tag me at JoJo Talks Too Much over on Twitter, and I will be sure to shout your name out in next week's video. Okay, so Stars Align Episode 3. I just can't. Much like Toma, I just can't right now. This show puts my nerves at about an 11 when they can barely handle being at a 4. Like, this is, I almost want to say it's not for me, because I don't know if I can keep handling, because it's not because the show's bad. It's so good at drawing, really honing in on some very serious stuff. Again, like I've said, stuff that has been in, I think, many people's lives, whether directly or indirectly. It has played a part in many people's lives, these violence towards young adolescent kids, and it's intense. It's done with such, I don't know, the way this show does it, this show manages to make hitting somebody with a tennis racket hit as hard as Vikings slaughtering a village. It's both Vinland Saga and Stars Align managed to get me to feel the same way, to out loud go, oh no, and cover my eyes with my arms, and actually lean back in my chair. Both shows managed the same thing, only one had Vikings slaughtering a village, and the other one had a kid hitting another kid in the head with a tennis racket. I was gonna start in order and talk about the episode as we went along, but you know what? Forget that. If you've ever seen one of these videos before, you'll know that I am pretty much all over the place, and I try to go as freeform as I possibly can with these videos. These are not scripted. At most, I have written down notes, and even for this episode, I don't have many notes because I was too glued to the screen and was too intent on what I was seeing. And I'm just going to go ahead and talk about Itsuki first, a character who I genuinely knew next to nothing about. In fact, he was one of the characters that, again, other than Maki and Toma, I actively did not like the tennis club. I thought the tennis club was just a pack of jerks for no reason. Although when you think about it, it makes total sense. And especially once we get to know more about Itsuki, we understand why he's so mean during Maki's first 3 matches. But we'll get to the matches later, because, again, I just want to hone in on Itsuki here. The go-home club arrives after Toma leaves. Toma splits from the group. He's super pissed for reasons we'll get into later in the video. But basically, the tennis club being on their own, I was like, okay, so they're maybe going to learn a lesson about, maybe we need to improve or whatever, typical, sports stuff, which I'm all here for. I like that. That's why I watch sports series. But that is not what happens. What instead happens is the go-home club shows up, and they're just a right bag of jerks, absurdly, needlessly mean to Itsuki, just saying oh, your sister's a good player, but you guys, you don't even get a court to play on. What's wrong with you guys? Haha. You two are part of the go home club, so why don't you go home? Hearing these two kids go at our boys, even though they're not quite my boys yet. I'm still not the biggest fan of the tennis club, but I get why they act the way that they act. But hearing them go at the characters that we know was cruel, because we know that they are trying. They're not the best, and sometimes they can be outright jerks, but it's their team, and they give a damn. And who are these two who don't even actively participate in school activities to say anything? So I was pretty much on Itsuki's side when he's like, why don't you guys, if you're part of the go home club, why don't you guys do what the name says and go home? I was like, yeah, I agree. Character whose name I don't know, because at the time I didn't know it. And it escalates pretty quickly. Now listen, I grew up with the mentality that if somebody chooses you, you stand up. There's a line in John Q where it's, if somebody chooses you, you stand up, you be a man. And accurate. Doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl. Somebody chooses you, you stand up, because backing away or running away doesn't solve anything. And sometimes you're put in a position where words aren't enough, and it sucks because there are people like that who won't listen to reason, won't listen to words, and sometimes a fist is the only thing that can do the talking. However, note that I said fist. You don't use a weapon. Punks use weapons, and that was a punk move. And I was pretty shocked to see Itsuki hit the kid upside the head with a racket. Not just the fact that it's a weapon, because it was. And that's, again, like I said, a punk move. But to use the racket is like, you care about this thing, man. And that was my initial feeling of like, what? You are a punk. Because the kid ends up bleeding and is like genuinely, it'd be different if he hit him in the arm, it'd be different if he hit him in the stomach or whatever, but he hit him upside the head and caused bleeding, and like, it's intense. The way that this is shot, the smirk on Itsuki's face, I'm not even gonna show the clip of the actual blood because no thank you. It was actually done in a way that actually got me squeamish. Again, kind of shocking given the context, but it's a lot. And not a lot of blood, but it's a lot in that moment to have that happen with this character who did seem cruel during his match with Maki, but to the extent of which he could be cruel, I was not aware. And I was so baffled. I was like, you're a punk. Why would you do this? And then when they go into the backstory, it's like, that makes sense. But I suppose by that same token, you could easily go into the backstory of that Go Home kid and find out that he also has something going on, whether it's parent issues, friend group, external forces, family, other friends. Like, again, the show does an excellent job at telling you that even the people who may initially seem cruel and needlessly heartless are just kids. Like, they're just or just people in general. Like, they're just experiencing something outside that takes shape like in a different situation, and they executed that, in my opinion, brilliantly with Itsuki's character, because I went from thinking he was a punk hitting somebody upside the head with a racket without any, like, no hesitation and no real warning, just rocks up to the kid and thwacks him upside the head with a racket. I was genuinely shocked and kind of appalled. But after the explanation and when you figure out why, and again, the kid was being a dick. Like the Go Home kid did deserve to get hit. Did he deserve to get hit with a racket? I don't think so. Did he deserve to get a punch in the face? He absolutely did. So it's funny then that my whole opinion on Itsuki flips by the end, where I'm like, okay, I get it. Itsuki, much like our boy Maki, has some issues at home. Or I guess had an issue at home. I believe the mom is no longer in the picture. His mom essentially is so frazzled in this moment, and we don't really get into her head. We just know the situation because the tennis club says what happened. And it's that when Itsuki was a baby, his mom was so dazed and stressed, and she heard the kettle going. And if you've seen My Hero, you know exactly what's about to happen. But his mom poured hot water on his back as an infant, which I'm shocked Itsuki's not more, like, I'm shocked that he's not, I don't want to say dead, but like, I'm shocked that he's able to play tennis like that. Like, I don't know, obviously, like, I'm not familiar with how that damage could affect somebody, like, not just physically, but emotionally as well. And it's something that, again, the show, if you're clever and you're paying attention, you'll note that Itsuki wasn't in the change room with the other boys because he didn't want anyone to see the burns on his back. And it's intense when you think about, like, it's just, this episode and the show as a whole continues to be ridiculously intense, given that it's a show about soft tennis. I'm genuinely, I feel like I pretty much agreed wholeheartedly with the teacher in the aftermath of what happened with Itsuki, where he says, like, you don't hit somebody with anything, no weapons, ever. And I agreed. I was like, yes, that is a punk move. You don't do that. And Itsuki, you are not a punk, so don't play punk moves. You know what I mean? Like, you're better than that. Don't do that. You love that racket. Like, you like tennis. You're here for tennis. You're not a bad person, so don't play bad person moves. Don't be a punk. I agreed with the teacher. When I first saw that, I was like, that kid shouldn't even be in the team anymore. But afterwards, I was like, nah, he kind of, like, when I stopped and think about it, again, like the teacher did, he probably, like, heard everything, dialed it in, and then kind of deliberated on it later, basically saying, like, okay, listen, Like, what you did was wrong, and you know that it's wrong. There's no violence on that court, and even if there was violence, you're not meant to use a weapon, especially not your tennis racket. But I understand why, and that kid was being a dick. And I was like, yes, I agree with the teacher. Also, yes, I would like candy. I love that teacher. He's the best, not the best character, but he's my favorite character. He's the one I relate to the most. I love the teacher. Now that I've rambled about Itsuki for probably, I'm assuming, a good majority of the episode, I do feel as though we should move on and talk about Maki. Now, Maki in this week's episode actually gets to play his first real match. And he plays his match. It's really hard to transition out of this. He plays his first match against the members of the boys tennis club, obviously. And these first matches, again, were like, I almost was annoyed to an extent. Like, that's the thing that the show does really well, is that it does get under your skin, but when you stop and think about it, like, it's like, because you have that, I had that moment of like, you know what, I can't stand these characters. These characters are so annoying. They're so blah, blah, blah. And I stopped and I asked, why are they being annoying? And you notice this as the matches are going on, because it's the first match is unrefined, the second match is needlessly mean, and then the third match is just straight up cruel and painful. And when you look at each of the characters and you understand why that's happening, why they're unrefined, why they're mean, why they're being spiteful and vengeful towards Maki, and you really think about it, the characters being quote-unquote annoying, and I do use quotes on that because I don't actually think they're annoying. It's just that sometimes their behavior comes off as annoying. It's, to me, a huge signifier that the show is doing something extremely correct, and that is that it wants you to understand that these characters are feeling genuine emotions and reacting as teenagers would. Because these kids have been playing tennis for so long, and they've been told that they suck for so long, that when they see Maki, a random dude off the street, essentially, like this dude who just waltzes up to the court and thrashes them, of course they're going to be upset. Because they've been training. They've actually, at least as far as they're concerned, they've put in the effort, even though technically you could argue that they haven't. But they've tried. They've been trying. And then this dude just walks up with innate talent and destroys them. Of course they're going to be upset. And when I had that moment, I was like, damn it, the show is so good that even when I'm mad at what's happening on the screen, it was all by design. It's insane. And even what I love too is that they even go so far as to say that these kids are not bad at tennis. In fact, because they've trained so much, they actually are quite skilled. But it's their type combination. What is this Pokemon? It's their combinations that are bad. And when Maki says that, I was like, it makes sense. And again, Maki, like, listen, Maki, Maki, I love you, but you are so snarky. You're so snarky and you don't help your own case. Like when these kids are like, this freaking guy, this guy just rocks up and he's like best friends with Toma, and him and Toma just like destroy us. That's not fair. That's not fair. Like, of course they're upset. And Maki doesn't make it any better when he's like, man, you guys suck. Like, thanks, Maki. You're so helpful. I mean, he is helpful because he genuinely, that is the reason. He figured out why. Like, when he watches, again, and it's just, I like the fact that he doesn't arrive at this moment. Like, Maki doesn't say, like, the reason you guys suck is because your combinations, your pairs are bad. He doesn't say that. He doesn't just come to that out of the blue random. He doesn't just pluck that out of the air. He just instead watches and observes not just his own team, but other teams. He watches the girls' team, and he starts kind of piecing the puzzles together. And earlier, in a earlier scene, he is given like a type, like he's been given all the players' names and their personality types and like where they excel and what areas they're good at. And he's looking at this, and he kind of ponders to himself, and and when he hears from the vice president, Rintaro, I believe his name is, he is told that they picked their type, like they picked their pairs, and he's like, okay, that's all right. And then when he watches the girls' team, he's like, oh, okay, I get it. And you see that happen on screen. It's not something that happens off screen. You see it happen throughout the episode, laying breadcrumbs. This show is expertly handling its narrative. And again, a narrative in a sports anime. Like, it's handling not just its narrative, but its characters brilliantly. I don't want to say flawlessly, but brilliantly. this isn't even me getting into stuff like Maki making a meal for everybody, Toma's big blow up, or even just like the whole like we need to stick together thing, which to me was the perfect way to end the episode. Was with Maki saying like we need to stick together, because to me that's how this show almost is like the textbook definition of 3-episode rule, where if you watch these 3 episodes back to back, it almost tells like a complete story, where Maki starts off thinking like the soft tennis club is dumb, he wants nothing to do with it, the only way he'll join is if he's paid, and he does still hold on to that. He's like, hey, if you leave, because remember, Toma had that big blow up, he was pissed because he's blaming himself at his quote-unquote poor leadership is the reason why the boys team sucks, according to him. And Maki and Toma's brother both like unite as a united front and essentially tell Toma, it's not your fault. That's a big thing that comes up multiple times in the episode. It is not Toma's fault, and sometimes things are out of his control, but leaving is a poor decision. And Maki makes the point like, if you leave, I don't get paid, so you can't leave. But to me, the reason why I say that it completes a full story is when we first meet these two, it's Toma trying to convince Maki to join the boys tennis club. Now it's Maki convincing Toma to stay in the boys tennis club. And Maki's point of, we all need to stick together. And he refuses. Like he says, like, I refuse, like, I vehemently refuse to let you go. You are not allowed under any circumstances to leave this club. And I'm not gonna lie, I was getting misty-eyed. I was getting pretty misty-eyed. And that line of, we need to stick together, was intense, because it's Maki coming to the realization that this club not only needs each other, but it needs him, because he understands what characters like Itsuki are going through, and he knows that this tennis club is probably one of the few bright things in some of these dudes' lives. So they need each other. They have to stick together. Even if it's going to be tough, they have to stick together. And Maki actively trying to make this club better, it's just good stuff. I do think maybe it goes too far. It can be kind of like violently dark at times, not just this episode, but even like the show as a whole, you can make that argument. But this episode was really, really good. Not to mention too, the animation again is really good. The show is too good given its premise. The show has no right to be as good as it is, and yet here we are. With that said, everybody, I'm gonna give this week's episode a very, very, very strong grade of A, as close to an S as I could possibly give it. But this was some really phenomenal stuff. On that note, everybody, that just about wraps everything up. But before we go, as always, I want to give a big shout out to the good folks over on Patreon, namely those in the Earl Grey tier: Calvin Atkinson, Crowbar of Irony, Dominic, Urza, Ginkotaku, No For Nothing, Maria Teresa, Mirth Mouser, Omner Garamond, Cell, Shadow Creative, Sipco Games, Somastan, Steven, Tristan, and Verdon. Thank you all so much for your continued support over on Patreon, and hey, if you too would like to join the T Squadron, then by all means go ahead and check out that first link in the description to check out our Patreon page, see all the cool rewards you can get for as little as $1 a month, and get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord. But on that note, everybody, that's going to be a video, so I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, you've probably been on the internet long enough to know what to do already, so I ain't going to tell you, but I will say that it is appreciated. And if you are feeling stressed out today, then you go have yourself a warm cup of tea, and I will talk to you all again real soon.